It's week 12. It's the end of phase 2. We're watching Antman. We're watching some one-shots. It's a bumper episode of Countdown to Infinity War.
Countdown to Infinity Wars. Countdown to Infinity Wars. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Countdown to Infinity War, where I'm watching all 17 Marvel Cinematic Universe movies leading up to the release of Avengers Infinity War, coming out April 27th worldwide. Last week we were watching Avengers Age of Ultron, and this week it is the end of Phase 2, Ant-Man. So here at Countdown to Infinity War, we don't bother about plot, we don't bother about character, we don't even bother about Infinity Stones. What we're interested in is the timeline of the Marvel Cinematic Universe and whether or not it actually makes any sense. So with that in mind, in order for us to see if Ant-Man has had any change on the Marvel Cinematic Universe timeline, here we go, we've got to have a look at the timeline. This way. Okay, so here is the timeline, and all the way up here is Ant-Man, which I believe has been set in 2017, late 2017. This is because, first of all, you do kind of know that it's set after the events of Avengers Age of Ultron. Now, I'm going to be talking a little bit more later in the video about why I think Age of Ultron has been set in 2017, because this has changed a little bit from my prediction last week, but I'll talk about the movie a bit later. But we do know that Ant-Man was definitely set after the events of Sokovia. We see that in a newspaper, and Hank Pym makes a comment about dropping cities out of the sky. So it must have happened. So I've put it like that it must be fairly recently happened if it's still in a newspaper and things like that. So I've said a few weeks after Age of Ultron, so I'm saying late 2017. Going back a bit, we see that as well that in 2014, Scott Lang goes to prison. We know this because it's mentioned quite regularly that he's been in prison for 3 years. And one of the other things that really sort of comes alive during Ant-Man was the period of the 1980s, sort of late 70s, early 80s. So this is where we stand at the moment, and we're going to zoom in here. So first of all, Hank makes mention that he invented the Pym particle 40 years ago. So I've said 1977. It could be a little bit more than that. It could be a wee bit later. But 1977 is what I'm going to go for. We know that Janet Pym goes subatomic in 1987, the bit with a missile. Hank Pym then quits S.H.I.E.L.D. 2 years later, and I've just made a wee note to say that the S.H.I.E.L.D. at the time consisted of Howard Stark, Peggy Carter, and Mitchell Carson, who later turned out to be Hydra. Also another date that we've learned about was that Hope Pym must have been born in 1980, as she said that she was 7 years old when Janet, what she thought would died. And one of the reasons I actually wanted to do this timeline is because I actually got the box set of Phase 1 and Phase 2. And when I got to the end of Ant-Man, I started looking at the bonus features of the second of Phase 2. And one of the things that's on there that I kind of knew about, but didn't really know too much about, were these Marvel one-shots. They were like little short films that were produced that I kind of knew about, but hadn't really ever had a much chance to see. I didn't really sort of sought them out, but I sat and watched them all, and some of them are so good. Like, really enjoyed them, and not only that, but because they answer a lot of questions that I had about various things that happened in these movies. So what I thought, as a kind of end of phase 2 video, part of that I wanted to include and put on the timeline the different one-shots that have been filmed. So if you bear with me, we'll go back over to the timeline. I'll have a look, and we're not looking at these chronologically as how they came out, but rather chronologically as when they were set. So we'll start with the earliest one, and then I'm going to go through them and to the most recent. Okay, so let's go back to the timeline. Okay, so the first one that came up was, and I've actually mentioned this before in a previous podcast, when I was looking at Captain America, I think it was, I can't remember. But the Agent Carter took place in 1946. It's a really good one, and it's all about basically Agent Carter and what happened after the events of Captain America and her being invited to head up S.H.I.E.L.D. with Howard Stark. After that, the next one that kind of comes up is The Consultant, which should have happened around about the events of, just after the events of the Hulk taking place. So we've said that, from previous videos, you can look back if you want, that I thought that Stark meets General Ross in August 2008, so it should have been around about that time. Now, as I said, I don't really want to review any of these movies or one-shots or anything like that, but I will say this, that The Consultant is excellent because it actually manages to answer one of my major questions about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Why on earth did Tony Stark get sent to recruit the Hulk from General Ross? It didn't make any sense, and this just cleared everything up. I'm not going to spoil it for you. I suggest you seek it out. But yeah, go and find and watch The Consultant because it answers, in my opinion, one of the more annoying questions of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We next have a very good thing. A funny thing happened on the way to Thor's hammer. Not really much happens in it, but it's a really good one. And that must take place around about June 2009. Then we have item 47, which must have taken place not long after the events of the attack on New York, so summer 2010. I'd say item 47 is probably one of my least favourite of them, but it was interesting. I thought that there was this idea of them getting this alien technology, and I was hoping as I was watching it, I was thinking, is this going to somehow tie in with Spider-Man Homecoming? Getting this alien technology. Did they actually find that alien technology, or did they get it from like some dealer that's been dealing them, like the Vulture? But no, it turns out that they actually did just find a bit of alien technology. But it was so close. It would have been so beautiful if they had actually gotten that from like some from arms dealer, and that would have tied in really well to Spider-Man Homecoming. Oh well, can't have everything. And then lastly, Hail to the King, which must have taken place a little while, maybe a few months after the events of Iron Man 3. And Hail to the King does something excellent as well. Again, very much like The Consultant, it answers one of the best questions, I think, and it sets up something that is just brilliant. Again, I'm not going to spoil it, but it answers a really fantastic question that has really kind of annoyed me about Iron Man 3. So there's one last thing I want to talk about before we finish, and that's about the current date of the MCU as it stands in Antman, because last week, if you watched last week's episode, I talked about the fact that Captain America says at the end of the movie that he was frozen in ice 75 years ago, which meant that it put Age of Ultron in the place of being set in 2020 because he was frozen in ice in 1945, which didn't make, to me, any sense. And all week it's not been sitting right with me. I just feel like it's not quite right. Mainly because we know, and in hindsight, I suppose, that Spider-Man Homecoming says that the events of Civil War and Spider-Man Homecoming take place 8 years after the event of the Avengers. Now, so this got me thinking, and I've slightly rejigged it, and this is where I'm going with this. So I've decided that Captain America was frozen in ice in 1944. So that brings us back a year. There's no evidence to say that he was frozen in ice in 1945. It had to be at least after 1944 because that's when Bucky went missing. So I'm going to say that he got frozen in ice in 1944. So, and rather than say, okay, he meant exactly 75 years, I'm going to say he's rounding up the figure. And the sort of lowest figure I can think of that you would round up to 75 is 73. So I'm going to suggest, here's what I'm saying, and I think it might work, is that he went frozen in ice 1944, and he was frozen for 73 years, which would take us to 2017. And then when he's been talking at the end of Age of Ultron, he's just been rounding up the figure, saying 75 years. Okay, it makes sense as long as one thing. So the next movie we're going to be watching is Captain America: Civil War, which technically is the beginning of Spider-Man: Homecoming. So as long as there are no dates or anything like that, or I suppose even if they confirm the date, as long as there's something that or nothing that points us towards the fact that Captain America: Civil War took place in 2018, then that would completely work out. That would work out the entire timeline, because then Avengers took place in 2010 when the Vulture got sacked from the salvaging from the Chitauri. 8 years later, Civil War happens, and it's 2018. So at the moment, that's my plan. That's my thought of where everything fits in. But I guess we're just going to have to see what happens. I'm hoping that it all works out. Well, thanks very much for watching. So next week, as I mentioned, we're going to be looking at Captain America: Civil War, which I'm very excited about. Definitely one of my favourite MCU movies, and probably there's a lot in there that tie in with a lot of stuff, because I know there's definitely a lot of things with the whole mission report, 16th of December 1991, that sort of stuff. But we'll see how it goes. Alright, see you next week. Bye.